Hey everybody, let's talk briefly about your final short essay assignment, the film analysis. Okay, so I won't spend too much time today talking about this because you've done a similar thing at least, twice. This is your third time, and then for your final essay, which I'll do a separate video about, basically you can build on any of those three, so keep that in the back of your mind. So for the film analysis, I thought I'd just take you through how I might do this, and if you don't know this by now, I'm a big Batman fan. You can see Batman is behind me here, and my book on Batman just came out, Batman and the Joker. And so, anyway, if I were to do this 2 to 3 page film analysis, I would start by potentially looking at Batman films that have come out. And of course, this is just an example. You're not expected to do this exactly. But I could look at one film and really do a deep dive into some of the themes or some of the ideas in there, considering earlier readings that we've done, whether that's watching Dallas, whether it's about a Marxist analysis, feminist analysis, early culture versus anarchy ideas. All of that could be applied to that kind of film analysis. So anyway, I was thinking I would try to narrow in on something. So for me, in this example, I would look at Batman's costume. And I say that because it reveals more. And we've talked about this all year, right? What are the explicit properties? So if you look at these examples that I'm going to show, Batman looks different, obviously, in different film iterations and at different times. So the explicit properties, we can't really debate, right? So Adam West, in the Batman film that came out during that series in the 60s, he looks very, let's say, soft, right? He's wearing sort of spandex. He has etched on eyebrows. He doesn't look as scary, especially as compared to later versions. Then we get Michael Keaton, who looks a little more technologically savvy, let's say, right? This came out in '89. It reflects and represents ideas of, American culture more broadly in 1989. Then we have the later films. Tim Burton continued, Joel Schumacher took over, and then there are the infamous bat nipples. So these suits, for no real reason, like no practical reason, right? They look like Greek gods, and they have nipples, among other things. And Joel Schumacher took it in a new direction, right? And we could say that that also reflects ideas from the 90s, perhaps that people weren't taking it as seriously as they did in '89. Maybe things are a little more flamboyant, things are to be taken less seriously. There are ways that we can interpret this. To me, one of the more interesting changes in the Batman mythos, at least in Hollywood, was when it got rebooted after the horrible Joel Schumacher films, and Christopher Nolan, the director, and Christian Bale, the actor who plays Bruce Wayne Batman, take a very hardline sort of military approach that is in distinct contrast to these other Batmen, right? Especially the Adam West one, where he's very, very soft. He doesn't look military at all. In fact, he looks like the opposite, like the counterculture. And so we can read this as reflecting those time periods, right? The newer Batman came out after 9/11. And Will Brooker, excellent author, writer, someone I've interviewed before, talks about how Batman after 2001 represents a different idea of the country, America, and the world, and the way that that works, right? We can see that in some of the more military, we could get into sort of neoliberal discourses, but basically we can say that the costume itself, this would be maybe my argument in the essay, the costume in this film and how it changes from earlier films represents a change in American attitudes in popular culture. And I would use, there are different things you could use. Louis Althusser's repressive state apparatus versus the ideological state apparatus might be good to think about how ideology works here, because Batman and the Batman films, they're done by different people. They're done by not agents of the state, right? They're done by Hollywood directors and things, not by the president or someone. And yet they reflect the state, meaning America the government in some way, right? Because they reflect issues that people are dealing with in the government. So at first, the first Batman with Adam West, the first television Batman, really, he does drugs accidentally, but someone slips him a Mickey, and so he's doing that famous dance where he goes like that, right? He's engaging in a lot of countercultural sort of hippie things. The newer Batman with I'm using Christian Bale. I know there are newer Batman even still, and I just don't have time to go into the Robert Pattinson thing, and that's a whole other issue that's interesting to talk about. Just let me know if you want to talk about that. I can always talk Batman. But yeah, so I would look at these films, but I wouldn't try to summarize all of the films, and I wouldn't try to say how the films work in all of their dimensions, but I would pick something. So in this case, I'm picking Batman's outfit, and I'm asking, what are the explicit properties? So then you just describe what you see, right? This is hard plastic, or it's made out of hard plastic, the Michael Keaton one, but it's also supposed to be bulletproof, and it's supposed to be much more utilitarian in the sense that it's made for combat or whatever. Batman of the 60s is not made for combat, it's made for play, you could argue. Then the newer Batman is like complete military grade. He's also funding his own basic military operation, and that reflects a lot of the issues. You know, we have what was or sort of continues to go on in Iraq and Afghanistan. We have issues of terrorism that early Batman, even in the 90s, wasn't particularly concerned with, and that's reflected in how they prepare, right? Batman in the 90s he looks like a Greek statue. That reflects sort of an ideal maybe of Eros or of Herculean stature, but it doesn't reflect a military purpose. And then the newer Batman definitely reflects a more hardline and practical use, and we think more about how he's going to battle things like terrorists. Like the Joker also becomes a sort of terrorist with the newer ones, with the ones with The Dark Knight, as opposed to earlier Joker where he was just like a funny, flamboyant guy, right? These reflect issues that are going on that we can see in other guises with ideological state apparatus and with repressive state apparatus, right? Batman becomes a sort of symbol for repressive state apparatus, but he also challenges it, and he has this interesting dynamic in the Nolan one with the Joker, but also with Two-Face, and these characters represent threats that more closely resemble sort of terrorism. And then these threats also change over time, and the way that he presents himself, right? First as a sort of funny camp character, then as a more serious character in the 80s, the late 80s, and then as a more sort of dreamy character with George Clooney in the 90s, and then in the 2000s, a more serious, somber, realistic. You know, everything is supposed to be realistic. There's no sort of magical elements of lighting and things that don't seem at all like they could actually happen. I know Christopher Nolan tried to design it with his writers so that the tank is, you know, it looks like a tank as opposed to a Batmobile, like with neon lights or whatever. There's a lot you could say, so I would have to come up with an argument about how the costumes over time in the Batman films, in the Hollywood Batman films, represent the way ideological state apparatus worked from the 60s to the 2000s. And then I would have some subpoints like here's A, here's B, here's C, how I can use these explicit properties, which nobody can debate. Like nobody can debate that this is military grade Kevlar or whatever they call it, right? I'd have to do some research on what they do and what they actually set up. But then I would make an argument about how that reflects an implicit idea about the culture more generally. So if you can do that, if you can come up with a film or series of films, narrow in on an element, that could be a plot, that could be the way it's presented, that could be the coloring of the film, right? Or the aesthetic in terms of the choice of long shot versus close up, or there's a million things you could choose. Don't try to choose a million things. Try to choose basically one main thing and come up with a good thesis statement that says what your argument is, how it relates to the film or films that you've chosen, and also how it relates to the readings, or at least one reading that we've done in class, right? That's your starting point. Then you do extra research to find the specifics of your topic. Maybe you research more about the ideological state apparatus, if that's what you're doing, or whatever it is that you're interested in. So I expect additional research on top of the one reading that we did together. That's basically it.